So the President of the United States gets out the hospital, gives us campaign stunts full of bile, gas, and of course, COVID-19, typhoid Trump, with no mask, standing here. Again, this is immediately after getting out the hospital. Laboriously breathing, it looks like. It looks like he's having a hard go of it here. But again, he is full of COVID-19, so that would explain it. The president, radically embarrassed. Probably embarrassed more than any man has ever felt embarrassment in his life, because the president of the United States has downplayed this virus. He's acted like, hey, we're almost over the hump. We're almost over the hump. Get back to work, and bam, he's down. And a bunch of other people who are associated with the president also down. All of them, petri dish of a White House, going around without masks on and whatnot in the middle of a pandemic. As if it's an issue of masculinity, as opposed to being an issue of just good sense and science. So how do you play this? If you're the president of the United States, you've downplayed this virus. You've acted as if it's something like a flu. And you've tried to push people back into work through economic policy by having them not having the things that they need, by having them to be forced and compelled back into their jobs, not because the virus is gone, but entirely because you were depending on an economic system or an economy to get you back in office. And that economy has hit the skids. And not just hit the skids. People have realized, oh my God, this guy is far more incompetent than I thought was possible. I thought he was incompetent if we were doing some measurement like from Earth to Jupiter. And I'm finding it's to Andromeda Galaxy or somewhere. So, yeah, there's a problem here. And so the public that was giving the president a pass almost on the economy hitting the skids because they attribute it to the virus, realize that the virus and the results of this virus is the responsibility and the fault of the president of the United States. And his numbers and metrics on the economy started to go down to the point where Joe Biden is now more trusted on the economy than Trump. Trump gets sick, goes to the hospital, and the way he plays it is, see, it's not that bad. I'm Donald Trump. I was down for a couple of days, but I'm back up. I feel great. I feel like I'm a 20-year-old. I feel on top of the world. I'm going to be at the debate. And it's just like the flu. It's just like the flu. Don't let it dominate you. It's just like the flu. So when Donald Trump put this on Twitter, Twitter put a warning on it. Look at this. They put a warning. This violates our rules for spreading misleading and harmful, potentially harmful, information related to COVID-19. Flu is coming up. Many people every year, sometimes over 100,000. And despite the vaccine, die from the flu. Are we going to close down? Oh, did not let me send this. This is absurd. And you're an idiot. I'm sorry, a bit abusive. But Trump is going to get people killed here. So yeah, I'm sending this. I needed to send it to myself because I need to keep a note of it. But I was just going to retweet, but they forced me to quote it. Fair enough. Are we going to close down the country? I think he said over the flu. No. We have learned to live with it. Just like everyone is learning to live with COVID in the most populous populations, far less lethal. The reality of it is that the flu the death toll ranges between 12,000 and 61,000 since 2010. Let me repeat that. The number of people that die each year, 12,000 to 61,000 from the flu from 2010. Now, I'm sure if you go back before there were antibiotics and hospitals and stuff like that, you can find a higher number. But just to reiterate, 12,000 to 61,000 since 2010. Not 100,000. And even if it was 100,000, COVID-19 has killed over 200,000, with 7 million infected, with an expectation of nearly 400,000 by the end of the year. Even with your wildly inflated numbers, it does not touch the number of people that are dead and that will be dead and that at this moment dying and will die today. All of this to push people back into the economy, potentially getting those people ill. The Republicans right now, you can turn on Fox News, are arguing that old people and people who are sketchy about illness are holding back the youth from enjoying our world at their most formative years. This is the nonsense that these people are arguing. Facebook took this tweet down. Twitter left it up. Facebook took it down entirely. False, misleading information that is potentially harmful, that could literally, in real terms, get people killed. What was Trump's response? What does Trump do? What does a thin-skinned man do at this? He's the president, right? He's going to dominate. He doesn't like these companies censoring him, telling him what he can and can't say. And to be all that honest, I'm not a big fan of censorship either. But if you tell somebody to walk into a fire and that fire is going to be okay, I might have qualms with that. If you say, hey, go shoot X or go bomb Y, then I'm going to have problems with that. If you tell people syphilis, it's not that big of a deal. You can go without it being treated. And it was somebody who the public would believe. You realize when Donald Trump said that bleach could deal with the virus and cure the virus, you realize people start drinking bleach. My point is, I understand that many people distrust the White House. I understand that people consider Donald Trump a flagrant liar. I understand that the overwhelming majority, thank God, of the public believes that this White House is full of shit on COVID-19. Hopefully on everything else also, but definitely on COVID-19. But nevertheless, there's a percentage of true believers. What did Trump do? Trump gets pissed off and he goes on and screams, repeal Section 230. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean, repeal Section 230? I'm going to explain what that means. Because it would literally break the web. Some people like to say break the internet, but you must understand that's a misnomer. It's like the difference between saying a hypothesis and a theory. It's like I have a theory of X. Yeah, no, you don't. You have a hypothesis. This, when people say it would break the internet, it would break the web. The internet is different. The internet is the backbone. The internet would be perfectly okay. What we're talking about is the wetware, the software. It's going to break the way these companies do business and would literally break whether or not businesses like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram could operate at all. If they could operate at all. The internet and proliferation of the internet would be radically different today if Section 230 didn't exist. And I'm going to explain what Donald Trump is talking about, why he's talking about it, what it would mean. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. Let's talk about Section 230. Now, what Section 230 is, it's basically creates this differential between a publisher versus a platform. So under normal circumstances, if somebody puts something that's defamatory, explosive, or whatever, or makes a comment on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, those platforms are not going to be held liable for it. That's Section 230. That basically this platform is indeed a platform. And people who put stuff on the platform, those people are liable. So if somebody puts something on the platform that is defamation or libel on somebody else, that other person can be held liable for or responsible for it. If you say so-and-so had sex with so-and-so's wife, and that guy has difficulties, or that woman has difficulties because of such, and you find out that was a flagrant lie, and you knew it was a flagrant lie, and you was doing it just to injure that person, well, you can't sue Twitter. Twitter didn't know anything about that. You can sue the person. I hope you understand the difference between those things. I'm trying to give the examples that make it make sense. Those are platforms. Platforms present information. Publishers are different. Publishers can be held liable for that stuff. In this very specific case, though, when Trump is saying repeal Section 230, he's basically saying get rid of the protections that allow Facebook, Twitter to operate in the way that they operate. Why is he saying it? Because his argument is basically these guys are doing censorship. And because they're doing censorship, they're not platforms. He doesn't believe that the platform should be able to make a determination on whether to show X or whether to show Y, that they're only supposed to show everything. And if they don't show everything, then they're not a platform. That is not Section 230. Section 230 allows for the companies to do that, explicitly allows for the companies to do that. Constitution allows this. So right here. And the creator of Section 230 even says as much. So Section 230 allows for those services to restrict access to any content they deem objectionable. In other words, the platform themselves get to choose what is and what is not acceptable content, and they can decide or host or moderate it accordingly. That means free speech argument frequently employed by people who are suspended or banned from the platform that the Constitution says can write whatever they want doesn't apply. No matter how many times Laura Loomer tries to test it, a Harvard law professor, Lawrence Tribe, points out the First Amendment argument is generally misused in this context. Now, let me repeat that. This is what I'm looking at. This is recode. Section 230 also allows those services to restrict access to any content they deem objectionable. In other words, the platforms themselves get to choose what is and what is not acceptable content, and they can decide to host it or to moderate it accordingly. That means the free speech argument frequently employed by people who are suspended or banned from these platforms. The Constitution says they can write whatever they want doesn't apply. All of these people saying free speech, it doesn't apply. I mean, you've heard me have this argument or this conversation with people saying, what do we do? I mean, these are private platforms, and these things get a certain degree of discretion in what they choose and what they don't choose. And how do you mitigate and deal with that where you can get something that looks more representative of the public being able to say what they say, while simultaneously trying to have some restraints on people saying, let's blow up something, or let's have fires and something, or having this kind of racist milieu that it ends up with, these right-wing militias going out shooting people. My point is, it's difficult to try to find that balance. Platforms are given leeway in creating some level of balance in regards to, okay, what do you find objectionable or not objectionable? The catch is governments can lean on these guys. Governments can, mess around with this and chip away at Section 230. And some of them have. And as they chip away with it, there goes those platforms' ability to basically run their service without necessarily being under threat of lawsuit. The attack is on Twitter, Facebook, because they deleted Trump's posts. this is out of anger, and the thought being, I am going to hurt them by doing this. Section 230, as they describe it, is a sword and a shield, allowing for both. When platforms do this, they're not breaking the law. When they do this to Trump and say, okay, we don't want to show this, it's because basically they think it's harmful content. Now, the catch is you can make the case that says, well, wait a minute, they don't do this all the way around. And that's true. COVID-19, after it kills 300,000 people or 200,000 people, gets a certain, let's say, pin in their book where they say, yep, this one, we're not going to allow this. This has already killed 200,000 people. So whether you say they're being selective in it, fair enough, maybe. But I would say that after something kills 200,000 people with an estimate of 400,000 by the end of the year, I think they get somewhat of a pass on that. Donald Trump just wants to be able to put out nonsense and BS and basically flagrant lies that is understood as flat fact to be lies, and not just lies, in this case harmful. I am the last person to make this argument that I like these guys censoring speech and finding things where they can get rid of. By the same token, I am stuck with this notion that if you have people saying AIDS is safe and AIDS is okay and you don't necessarily need to treat AIDS, and you get people believing it, I think that's a problem also. How do you square the circle is the question. What I would say is chipping away or getting rid of Section 230 doesn't do it. If you need to put through some kind of legislation just trying to make it sure that the public has some level of forum, some level of a soapbox, some level where we can have some kind of conversation where there are rules by which these things are set in stone, where we know these things are in advance and our speech can be protected. Yes, agreed. That's First Amendment. That First Amendment doesn't necessarily apply, however, to private companies. And herein lies the rub. Trump wants to abuse it. Hence, these guys create rules in order to try to not allow it. This is problematic on several levels, right? I mean, when these guys take down Telesur, or they take down Palestinian sites, or they take down Iranian sites, hell, they could take down Russian sites. But they do this. The platforms do this. They do it all the time. And so I don't like the argument of censorship bugs me immensely. By the same token, 230 doesn't touch that. It doesn't fix that. If anything, it ends up just shutting down those websites. And so that would also mean that the thing that I use to organize my life, the website YouTube, gets radically changed. And again, the thing that we're watching right now may change or go away. What Trump is trying to do doesn't fix that issue of censorship. And the issue of censorship, I'm not even entirely sure applies in this case, because you can't yell fire in a movie theater, meaning you can't do things that would intentionally harm the public. And I don't see how this doesn't fit that. As you go down, one of the people who wrote this, Wyden, made the point that as co-author of Section 230, let me make this clear. This is right here. Trump and Barr also recently met with some Republicans and state attorneys generals to discuss ways the law can be used to further dictate how and when social media platforms can moderate user speech. Meaning, Trump's issue is, I want to be able to say whatever I want to say, even if it's harmful, even if it's a lie, even if it's misleading. I want to just be able to say it. And Twitter's like, no. And so he's like, okay, how can we screw with these companies in order to allow me to do that? As co-author of Section 230, let me make this clear. There is nothing in the law about political neutrality, Wyden said, Ron Wyden. It does not say companies like Twitter are forced to carry misinformation about voting, especially from the president. Efforts to erode 230 will only make online content more likely to be false and dangerous. Getting rid of Section 230 is not the solution. And again, I'm not even sure how that fixes anything other than attack those companies. It will not allow Trump to lie on those things or put out misleading information, especially if those companies can basically be sued. Meaning you would get a radically different internet. From the standpoint of trying to come up with a rule set where it's like, this is the rule set and this is in rule set encased in some kind of law for platforms. Maybe, but not in the way that Trump is trying to do it. Like, Trump is trying to do it where you could basically scream fire in a crowded theater. If you're trying to find some kind of rule set, however, where companies that are platforms have to deal with some kind of structure in determining what they show, what they don't show, and that type of stuff, maybe. Like, I think I have argued for something similar for that, in the sense of saying, I think it's somewhat unfair that companies like Google, Twitter, Facebook, that call themselves platforms, and it's not so much that pick and choose over things that are dangerous, no. It's the things that are not dangerous. It's the things that are opposing points of view. It's the things that are from other countries. Those are things that I chafe at when they get rid of or remove the inability of users to use other content because everything is copyright. You're having a debate between two opposing parties that are dealing with government itself. And even that you can't use in your videos because they would consider that to be copyrighted content. It's obscene, or they would just take the cash from the video. I agree that something needs to be done from the standpoint of social media in regards to making it more fair, more transparent, giving people more the ability to kind of share their information and content and everything else. And by no means do I mean being like belligerently racist, dangerous, where you're talking about setting places on fire, attacks, or anything like that. But from the standpoint of points of view, yes, those points of view should be heard. And I am more libertarian on this stuff, but I tend to be far in the camp of free speech. But free speech doesn't necessarily mean that you can put out speech that gets people killed or injured. And then maybe that's where and even that I'm sketchy on, because you can start making arguments, well, hey, aren't protests places where people can get injured, et cetera, et cetera? This is the problem with these kind of arguments, where it gets to be a slippery slope. Unfortunately for me, I see nothing wrong with what Twitter did in this very specific instance of saying, yeah, you're not going to get people killed for your political objectives. By the same token, from a larger context, yes, something needs to be done in regards to how social media is able to regulate certain content. And if they are indeed platforms, is there something that needs to be done? Not to allow more flagrant lying and that type of stuff, but I got to be honest, I don't know how you get away from that. I mean, the internet is full of people who are lying, even on social media platforms. And maybe I'm saying two things at once, but that's kind of the problem. The arguments about what levels and to the degree of this kind of engagement that we have as a public, this kind of public forum, where does it get to the point where it goes beyond this level of these guys are having a debate into this is something else? It's kind of like porn. People say, look, I don't know how to define it into law, but I know it is when I see it. And it's one of those things, and that in and of itself becomes problematic. And how do you construct a rule set that allows people to engage, discuss, without it getting to the point where violence is allowed? And that's not easy. I would say the President of the United States is not necessarily acting with clean hands on it. And I strongly suspect he doesn't even fully understand what Section 230 is. At least the way many of these right-wingers talk about it, they don't get it. I'll end this here. I'm going to say like, share, and subscribe. And what I am hoping, at the very least what I'm pushing for, is for us to discuss this on phone lines. Because I would love to have somebody on who's like a scholar on this, who can kind of go through and explain what it means and what the world would look like if it wasn't there. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, I would tell you this, would not exist. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Xavier Foster. If they don't censor Russia, there's BS bias. If they didn't censor, if they don't censor Russia. Look, I thought they might have. I mean, I saw them censor Telesur during the whole Maduro stuff. And basically, Twitter and Facebook were acting like arms of the United States government. I mean, for God's sake, they did the same thing to the Iranian channel, Press TV. Same thing. These guys in these countries are going to give a point of view. It would be weird if that point of view aligned exactly with the United States, especially if the United States is taking provocative action to attack those countries. And so if I give a certain perspective, or let's say let's say Press TV, for example, if they give a certain perspective, and that perspective is talking about the ships going to Venezuela, and they're talking about it as a success, why wouldn't they? The U.S. is attacking both. Both are regional powers that the U.S. has been trying to undermine. Why wouldn't they talk about that in glorious terms? Now, if Twitter sees that from Press TV and say, yeah, we don't like that, and nixes it, then you have to question why. It's a different perspective than your government. Or when the fires were taking place in Iran, said we didn't do that. And the U.S. said they did. And Press TV, and they get rid of Press TV. I mean, they did. I mean, they do this. They did the same thing to Palestinian sites. This is a problem. Like, honestly. And yes, Twitter can make a determination of what they show versus what they don't show. By the same token, they're a private company. But as you look at it, you're like, there's no fairness here. There's no, the information is cut in a particular way. And at any particular point in time, Twitter can work on behalf of the government and get rid of it. Yeah, that's a problem. I find great flaws with that. Facebook and Twitter are publishers. Big bro tech, but they're not. That's just it. I mean, they're platforms that, based on law, have discretion. That's literally the law at this point. You can change it, but that's literally the law. Do it, Trump. Also, skip my chat in your Tulsi vid. Oh, I didn't see it. I go back to it. Emblematic fate. I'm sorry. I didn't see the thing pop up. Malcolm and Panthers said not to vote for Democrat. Your vote is earned. Why do you lefties push the exact opposite message while quitting Black heroes? What are you talking about? You must not watch this channel, Emblematic Fate. You clearly have not heard me boost Democrats. Dude, you haven't watched this channel. Like, this is one of those things I don't shut up about. This is one of those things I don't shut up about. Barbara Marissa. Flint-led Snyder backs Biden. No surprise. Yeah, he's backing Biden. Look, my argument is very basic. Nothing changes. From the standpoint of the left, or from the standpoint of blacks, those are canned votes. And because they're canned votes, they're taken advantage of. They're exploited. They're logically exploited, rationally exploited. You have African Americans that vote to the tune of like 90% for black Democrats, and yet have no power. Consider that. Even though they may tell you voting is power and all of this other nonsense, how? What are you getting out of that? Kamala Harris is not a gift from the standpoint of anything. I'm making the point of real material gains. 88% back to Medicare for all. You have a pandemic with 30 million people out of a job, 40 million people are without health care, with a disproportionate skew of those being African Americans. 7 million people are infected with the virus. 200,000 are dead, with more expected to be dead as we move on through the year. If you are an African American, Medicare for all would dramatically benefit you, especially from the standpoint of the people who are at the bottom of the income scale. If you wanted Medicare for all, you could have said, you get our vote when you represent our interests. And until you do that, you will lose. The goal in that is not to elect Donald Trump. The goal in that is to assert leverage in the political space to be able to put your priorities into politics. Until you do that, you're irrelevant. And this is for blacks, this is for hippies, this is for a large number of Hispanics. Until you realize your power in the political space is your ability to basically assert what you want, a demand. Power concedes nothing without a demand, right? What's your demand? For the last 40 years, there hasn't been one. And you basically had a Democratic Party that has licked your ear with this notion of blue no matter who, or at least worse, while they continuously move further and further and further to the right. Obama would tell you, I used to be a Republican in the 90s. Democrat now. Jeb Bush, Democrat. Look at all these people who are voting for Joe Biden. Rick Snyder, all these Republicans, Colin Powell, person after person after person getting on that stage, voting Joe Biden. And Joe Biden hoping that a block of Republicans would join him to mitigate lefties that much more, just in case you got uppity. What you don't realize is that they were terrified this year. In 2020, when Sanders looked like he was going to run away with it, they were terrified. And that fear literally was able to bring a billionaire into the race. Well, that billionaire was no longer content with staying behind in the shadows, sticking money in their G-strings. No, I got to get in this. They're fucking it up. That socialist is going to run away with it. Their terror literally brought out the truth. We will tank this if it means stopping Sanders. Think of the gravity of that. A man who we're calling a monster, a man who we're calling an apocalypse, we are willing to rip it out of Sanders' hands, knowing that no Bernie supporter will vote for us, just for the chance of trying to beat Trump after we do something like that, even though we know we probably lose. At the end of the day, Nancy Pelosi is not poorer for Trump being in office. Your Democrats, the people who you see on television, they're not poorer for Trump being in office. Yes, they can afford to tank it. It doesn't dig into them. The catch here is you've allowed the rich and the poor to exist in the same party. And within this kind of capitalist class that exploits that poor class, who do you think the people in that party listen to? 90% of the races are won by the side with the most cash. Who are you going to listen to? You have dollars or pitchforks? You have no pitchforks. You just have dollars. And in just having those dollars, what happens? It moves further and further to the right as the party leans to the people who are paying them. It's rational. Why wouldn't they do that? You're not going to assert any level of authority in the mix. You basically vote for anybody that has a D or blue beside its name. So why do they need to pay any attention to you at all? Which is the rub. Until you're willing to get to the point of breaking this model, nothing changes. Your power, believe it or not, is not in the political space. Your power is to assert power on the political space. There's a difference in those things. When Sanders is running in the race, Sanders has no power in that process. Weak. Infinitely so. All of them hate his guts. And he's only in that race. So at the end of that race, he can con lefties to join the Democratic Party. The reality of it is they were always going to collapse on Sanders as a last resort. Didn't matter how it looked. It mattered that they stopped him. And the reality of it is, you're in this situation now where you have Biden and Trump. And you, lefties, instead of saying, wait a minute, they were terrified that he was going to take this, which means that he is popular. His policies are popular. And he was running a race where he was paying patty cakes and he was looking like he was going to take it. You get 88% of Democrats backing Medicare for all. In 2008, you couldn't even get them to bring it up. Couldn't even get them to bring it up. And you get 88%. You get All of these other policies. I mean, for fuck's sake. 72% expanded Social Security, 69% Medicare for all. That's everybody, rest of the population. Meaning this is the middle of your country. 67% $15 minimum wage, 67% legalized marijuana, 64% tax extreme wealth, 64% back union, 63% want a Green New Deal, 58% want to cancel all student debt and free public colleges and universities. Within the context of the Democratic Party, all of those numbers are higher. And you leave from this with nothing. What the fuck? Do you ever question why? How do you get numbers like this from your society and walk away with nothing? 40 years, you've done the exact same thing. And in 2020, you get the full realization that what you want is popular, and you still walk away. What are you doing wrong? And is it possible that what you're doing wrong is walking away from the policies that you back? Meaning, you're not Democrats. Stop pretending as if you are. Fight for the policies. And fight for those policies in the way people would fight for civil rights, and the way people would fight for women's suffrage, where the policy itself is the highest priority. And everything else is subordinate, including the parties. Until you get there, nothing changes. It takes a patriot of sorts. You need to stand on the side of your country and make the basic argument. You get our vote when you represent our interests. If you don't represent our interests, you will lose. And you look and you point that 30, 40 million of us, and all of us are on the same page. We want these three policies. These are the tip of the spear. And you make the argument that if Donald Trump is indeed the apocalypse, if the Democratic Party is right, if you're right, and Donald Trump is indeed the apocalypse, if he is going to bring the end of all days, permanent darkness, if that is who he is, then why are you fucking around? Why don't you appropriate Medicare for all? Why don't you appropriate the elimination of student debt, or $15 minimum wage or higher, or for that matter, a Green New Deal, or expand Social Security? Why don't you appropriate those things? Even if you appropriate 2 or 3 of the most popular, you could accrue and bring people around to your cause in order to beat a man you call the apocalypse. Why take chances? You make your demand. You make your demand from the tune of millions. Hopefully, ideally, you would have somebody in the political space that would help you out. But in our case, we don't. But from every lefty group, every lefty organization, every time somebody talked to them, if the Democratic Party really believes that Trump is the apocalypse, then how do they justify tanking it to a man they call the apocalypse? Or for that matter, risking tanking it to a man they call the apocalypse by not accruing people to their cause? Hillary Clinton was also leading this race. She also chose not to accrue these policies that would bring the party together in an organic fashion in order to beat Trump, and she lost. Does Biden have better chances? Yes. Do you want to take those chances? Trump takes the House, the Senate, 2 additional members on the Supreme Court, and the presidency. If the Democratic Party wants to roll the dice, then it's on them to roll the dice. That should have been the argument. This inversion of politics makes no sense to me. It is the candidate's responsibility to get your vote. Period. There is nothing else there. That's the end of the thing on the page. The end of the thing in the book. There's nothing else. It is the candidate's responsibility to get your vote. And when the public gets to the point of inverting that process in the way that we have, you no longer have a representative government. How can you argue it's representative when what the public wants accounts to statistical noise? And when you have a guy that says go vote for somebody else, when you're asking him about policies that the overwhelming majority of the population supports, that the overwhelming majority of the Democratic Party supports, I don't understand this argument of representative government. It is representative of a small band of people who are sticking huge amounts of dollars in their pocket. And the only way to break that model is for people to stop playing that game. This is not a rah-rah for Trump. This is not a rah-rah for anybody, if I'm being honest. This is a rah-rah for policy. Medicare for all is my litmus test. You're in the midst of a pandemic. I shouldn't even have to make the argument. 30 million people, if not more. It's in fact 40 million. You must understand, when Obamacare was signed and you Democrats were screaming universal health care, more than 20 million people, I think it was 27, but more than 20 million people were still without health care. Add another 15 million more to it. That's what you have. With 7 million people sick. And understand what that means. We're talking about medical bills. We're talking about comorbidities. We're talking about additional medical bills that go on after the virus takes place. And those people are basically left to their devices because of an incompetent president that didn't do due diligence to ensure that people were made whole. Or for that matter, a Congress that forced people back to work before all of this stuff was dealt with. I am not the person that is a rah-rah for Democrats. If you've ever watched this channel, that is not the impression that you'd have ever gotten from me. All right, I'm going to leave it here because this video has gone into something completely and entirely different. Emblematic fake. No, I'm talking about the other lefties like Tibate. Okay, fair enough, fair enough. I made an argument for no reason. Fair enough, fair enough, fair enough. Nay. Get Robert Barnes on, Jamal. Robert Barnes. I will try. I need to check out who he is. The name is not familiar to me, but I'll try. All right, guys. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Thanks all. Oh, got me at the last minute. In Willis. Thanks, Jamal. Keep telling the truth. Truth is hard. I try to give you my point of view. There are multiple truths. I mean, the truth of the matter is, if Donald Trump wins, he does take the House, he does take the Senate, he does most likely add additional members on the Supreme Court. You could end up with a Republican House, Senate, presidency with 5 members on that court that belong to Republicans. That is also true. Flat fact true, actually. But what I'm saying is also true. That part and parcel to the reason why you have Trump and Biden in the first place is because all accountability in the political process went away. So instead of having a Democrat that loses because his party says no, you basically have a Democrat that may lose with a party that says yes, incentivizing that Democrat to be that same shitty Democrat going forward, with the hope that people get sick of the Republicans and just vote for the shitty Democrat. This is kind of what you get with the Trump thing. I'm making the point that at some point you need to have an affirmative level of politics where you can say this is what we want, not this is who we're terrified of. Cowardice breeds no leverage in the political space. And in this very specific instance, cowardice is not recommended. You have multiple crises that avail you. And your country is in pure theatrics, not even dealing with it. If you want to talk about the collapse of a government or collapse of an empire or discrediting of a country, look at your world, look at your country in comparison to what it should be doing right now. There's a good segment of this population that's doing fine. There's a good segment of it that is not. And that is dramatically unhealthy. And those people that are not, at some point, will assert themselves. And that's when you're going to hear people wringing their hands again. Oh, the violence. Oh, the protests. Don't wring your hands. Don't wring your hands. It's not magic. The stuff that you're seeing happening right now with all of these people in desperate straits, do you believe that all of those people are going to keep those desperate straits and the stress of that to themselves? They are not. Like, share, and subscribe.